Daryl Morey is out as president of basketball operations for the Philadelphia 76ers. So coming up on today's show, we're going to look at 10 names who could potentially replace Morey and hopefully lead this Sixers team to where they want to be. Before we get into those candidates, and when I reveal my favorite candidate as well, it's a new era of Sixers basketball. Obviously, Embiid, Paul George, Nick Nurse still in Philadelphia, but a new decision maker calling the shots for the Sixers. If you are happy that Daryl Morey is gone, I know a lot of you in the comment section did want him to be fired. Show me, hit that thumbs up icon, like the video. I want to see where all you are at with this firing of Daryl Morey. So look, it was definitely time for Daryl Morey to go. I'm not going to argue that, but what I kind of talked about leading up until he was fired yesterday was, did it make sense to fire him and not fire Nick Nurse? The Sixers are keeping Nick Nurse because now the job was already, I think, not super desirable for other candidates because of the Embiid and Paul George contracts, their age, their injury history, having to deal with an owner like Josh Harris. And now you add in the fact that you don't get to decide your own head coach either. The head coach is already in place if you're a potential new president of basketball operations coming in. And so all these things you got to deal with now, like, it does make me a little bit worried in terms of the kind of candidates you might attract to this job, and especially with someone like Josh Harris running things where I think Harris may be a bigger problem than Daryl Morey, given the fact that he doesn't like to spend the luxury tax, and we've heard his issues before as well. So we'll see what kind of candidates do emerge, but what I'm looking for in this Sixers' next president of basketball operations is kind of a total 180 from what Daryl Morey was. I want someone who's young, a forward thinker who's keeping up with the current trends of the NBA, not someone who's like Daryl Morey living in the past, going off his 3-star system, which does not work anymore. Someone who's been a fast riser in their organization, who also has a good track record of understanding the game from a personal perspective. What I mean by that, Daryl Morey was far too analytical, and reports came out today that one of the main reasons he was fired is he didn't care about the chemistry of basketball on the floor. He didn't care about the personal aspect of things. That's a huge part of the game, right? So you can have a balance there, but whoever they hire has to have that personal perspective and approach to managing a roster. That's how it's done. Now, what do we know about the search so far? How does this impact the potential candidates Philadelphia could hire? Let's get into the latest intel first, then we'll get to the candidates I have on the show. Jake Fischer on the Sixers' new search for a president of basketball operations. The search for Morey's successor will be led by his former Warriors counterpart Bob Myers, now president of sports for Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment, and providing regular counsel to all the teams they own, including the NFL's Washington Commanders. Myers will also take temporary charge of the Sixers front office ahead of GM Elton Brand until a new president of basketball operations is named. It was stressed to me Tuesday night that Myers, although he is scheduled to arrive soon in Chicago to dive into his various pressing tasks, will step back into the advisory role once Morey's successor is named. I'm also told Myers will interview candidates internally as well as externally to take over, but it's far too early to name any possible favorites for the role. Now, what's interesting there, Fisher pointed out that that Myers will step back into the advisory role he's been in and not really be in that head of basketball operations role once the new person is hired. But then Shams Charania came out today and says that the Sixers' new hire, whoever it is, will partner with Bob Myers. So which one is it? Is Bob Myers taking a front seat role in terms of being the Sixers' head of president of basketball operations? Or is he going to kind of, take control of all of this? It's really curious what direction he decides to go in, because I think it's got to be one or the other to me. I think he's either got to take control and be the new president of basketball operations and make the decisions, which I'd be fine with, or if he hires someone, they've got to be the sole voice, because if you're going to be a potential candidate for this job, you're coming in here like, well, I'm just going to be partnering with Myers. I'm not going to get the full job. I don't really see how that'd be too attractive to some of these potential candidates. So we'll see if Myers actually does become a main decision maker for Philadelphia or not. I doubt he is, because he has a lot of other responsibilities, obviously with Josh Harris, with Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment. So we'll get to the candidates here now, right around the corner. Real quick, before we do that, wanted a big shout out to today's sponsor. As always, of course, that is Prize Picks, America's #1 sports picks app. Postseason basketball is here. Postseason hockey continues. It's baseball season as well. Phillies have been on a tear. No better way to cash in on the action than with our friends at Prize Picks. Super simple to use. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. You choose flex play or power play, and you are on your way. Love the new social feeds feature. On there, you can give me a follow at JChip. See my picks. Also see our friends' picks. Copy them in just one click. Speaking of, here are the picks I'm rocking with for tonight's action. Detroit versus Cleveland. Donovan Mitchell, more than 8.5 field goals made. Evan Mobley, more than 3.5 assists. Jalen Duren, less than 23.5 PRAs. 6-time multiplier to win $120. And right now, we have a great offer for new users. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code HMA when you play your first $5 lineup to receive $50 in lineups. Again, code HMA when you play your first $5 lineup to get an extra $50 in lineups with Prize Picks. That link to download the Prize Picks app in the comments and description of today's show. So let's get into the candidates here. Going to go through 10 names, guys, that could replace Daryl Morey. And we'll start internally because, of course, Fischer did mention they will interview some internal candidates. And the obvious option for that is current Sixers GM Elton Brand. And so we'll kind of go through a quick background for all these guys, and I'll give my quick thoughts on each of them. Elton Brand, of course, current Sixers general manager, but does not run basketball operations anymore, at least not since Morey was hired. Brand did run basketball operations before Morey was hired in 2020, but Morey was brought in, kind of took a step back. Now, Brand was a candidate for the Hawks' lead executive opening last season. Of course, didn't end up getting that job, and Brand, a longtime Sixer as well, played 5 seasons there, 2008 to 2012, and 2016 as well. Look, I'd be disappointed if this is the outcome. I'd get wanting to stay internal, especially if Bob Myers is going to kind of go 50-50 in this new role. It makes sense to keep it in-house with Brand, but I want a new voice, really. I want someone who hasn't been in this organization to come in and make changes and set a new culture. And so if it is Brand, I'm not going to be too optimistic about the future of this organization. I'll just be honest. So now let's get into some more external candidates here, starting with Vince Rozman. He is the vice president of identification and intelligence for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Kind of an interesting term here, but Rozman, I think, is a really hot name for a potential candidate here for Philadelphia for a lot of different reasons, right? So with OKC now, but spent 16 years in the Sixers front office and was with Philadelphia when they made some great moves, including drafting Isaiah Joe back in the day. By all accounts, he was a big part in drafting Isaiah Joe. And also, he was with OKC when they signed Isaiah Joe away from the Sixers. So he left in between there, and he heads OKC's draft process, of course, along with, not Presti. With Sam Presti. We know OKC has had a lot of really good drafts and being able to develop a lot of players, including an AJ Mitchell, who's hooping right now for them. And look, he's had a lot of praise in the past. Sam Hinkie, who hired Rozman back in the day, when he was hired away, taken by the Thunder, tweeted out he's incredible, a hidden gem because he deflects credit so graciously. He's great with people, at evaluating talent, at systems, as a communicator. Being great as a communicator, being great with people, 2 things I want. Thunder made a brilliant hire. And Daryl Morey also showed him a lot of love when the Thunder hired him. Rozman's been a critical part of the Sixers' strong player evaluation process for a long time and will be missed. We wish him the best with OKC. Could we get a reunion? I think he'd be my #1 choice based off the candidates that are being reported right now and that are kind of out there as well. He kind of fits everything I want, right? He's someone who has that track record of success, but also, you're not hiring a guy who's super long in the tooth and is, a little bit more younger, up and coming, and he has connections to the organization. I think it just makes a lot of sense. Next up, Dennis Lindsey, Senior Vice President of Basketball Operations with the Detroit Pistons. Another name that's been floated around a lot in recent GM and President of Basketball Operations searches for other teams. Started as a scout with the Jazz way back in '96. Got to Vice President of Basketball Operations in just a few years in 2002. Spent some time with the Spurs. Went back to Utah as their GM, where he had some pretty good hits, right? Drafted Rudy Gobert, number 27 overall. Traded up to get Donovan Mitchell at number 13 overall. And then he's been with the Detroit Pistons for the last couple of years, and we've seen the turnaround that Detroit has had as well. So I'd be fine with this option. Proven track record of success. Maybe not my #1 option, but, when they're able to develop players and, identify talent like that, it's always a pretty good sign. Another name that has been pretty hot in the streets as well, Matt Lloyd, the current general manager for the Minnesota Timberwolves. He got his days started way back in Chicago as a media coordinator in 1999, rose all the way up to become the director of college scouting, was the Orlando Magic GM for a while, and then ended up in Minnesota. Been a hot name the past few years in numerous searches. He was actually the favorite for the Chicago job, and mysteriously they kind of went in a different direction, especially considering he's from Chicago. This guy, I think, would be my second choice. He's drawn a lot of praise from a lot of people around the NBA. And you look at Minnesota as well, like the job they've done with some of their end of the bench guys and their depth, getting guys who you may not expect to be all that good, playing well in big time moments. I mean, look at them right now. They beat the Nuggets when they had no Anthony Edwards, had no Donnie DiVincenzo. A lot of their end of the bench guys have really come up and progressed. I like the track record there, so he's my number 2 option. An interesting one here. Nick Uren, the GM for the Phoenix Mercury in the WNBA. And this is an intriguing option if you're looking for someone who can, bring a different perspective to the organization and kind of, bring in their own ideals, right? So Nick Uren did get started back in 2009 as a video coordinator with the Phoenix Suns. And then in 2014 with Golden State as a manager of advanced scouting. This is where he has some ties to Bob Myers, which is why this name has come up a little bit for Philadelphia. Worked, of course, with Myers, and Myers was a GM for the Warriors. And Nick Uren has actually been credited with creating that Warriors death lineup, the original one, where they ran a lot of small ball, putting Draymond Green at the 5, where it was Steph, Clay, Iggy, Barnes, and Draymond. Gave him a lot of credit. And also, credit to him as well in WNBA, turning the Phoenix Mercury from 9-31 2 seasons ago to a finals appearance last year. So clearly doing something right. Obviously, the NBA is a whole other challenge, but I think it would be an intriguing option, but risky, because not a whole lot of high-level development here in terms of spending time in the NBA. Not quite as much of a proven track record as a couple of these other people were. I'm not sure this is where the Sixers would go, but I would kind of like, honestly, just switch things up a little bit. All right, 5 more names to get to, starting with Larry Harris, Assistant General Manager and Director of Player Personnel for the Warriors. Again, more Bob Myers ties here, since he's going to be the one leading the search, and if it's going to be 50-50, it makes sense to have somebody who is familiar with him. Larry Harris has been with the Warriors for a long time, since 2008, so clearly a Myers connection there. Also spent 20 years with the Bucks in a variety of roles. So this is a guy who has been around the league for a long time. Bob Myers back in 2018 did credit Larry Harris as a great reason why we've had some success. Obviously, the Warriors had more than just some success. It was a lot, but, a guy who's been around a little bit longer, I like a little bit of a younger face if I'm Philadelphia. Next up, Jesse Gould, going back to the OKC. Well, a lot of these names you'll see are organizations that have had a lot of success over the last few years. It makes sense, right? Poach guys from teams that have been successful. So Gould, 16 seasons with the Thunder. Of note, has overseen the roster construction and the management of the Thunder's G League team. So not quite at the NBA level, but kind of like a GM experience, but at a lesser level for the G League team. Also a Philadelphia native, so some ties there as well. And again, anyone connected to this OKC organization, obviously a lot of credit goes to Sam Presti for doing all that, but definitely a name to watch out for. Mike Zarren, Vice President of Basketball Operations for the Boston Celtics. And this one might be a little bit more of a long shot because Zarren has been with Boston for so long, 21 seasons, and also grew up a Celtics fan. So are you going to be able to poach him away from Boston, especially to Philadelphia? I'd be surprised, but was a candidate for the Sixers GM job back in 2013 that, of course, went to Sam Hinkie. And so could you go back to that? Well, someone that the organization might be a little bit familiar with, is in charge of talent evaluation and strategy for Boston. And, obviously Sixers just beat Boston, F Boston down in the comments, but they have had a lot of talent over the years and been able to develop players as well. So certainly would be a name that could be interesting, especially with the, again, connections, almost getting that job back in 2013. Dave Telep, Assistant GM for the Spurs, another name that has been kind of heating up a little bit over the last few years, kind of a fast riser. When I talk about, fast risers, those are the kind of guys I'm looking for who might be younger, but are really impressing already. And Dave has a very interesting background, right? A former ESPN recruiting analyst, sideline reporter, and studio analyst. So not quite the background a lot of these other guys have, but I kind of like that, right? You see the game from a little bit of a different perspective. Hired by the Spurs in 2013 as a scouting coordinator, and before this season was promoted to assistant general manager. And again, the Spurs have had a lot of talent over the last few years. And of course, the Wemby pick, it was like, obviously he's going to go number one, but picking up Stephon Castle, even going back to 2013, like those mid to late 2010 Spurs teams were still really good. So again, you want a younger name who's had a little bit of a different background. I kind of like this. And talk about different backgrounds. How about Austin Brown here, co-head at CAA in their basketball division? Of course, CAA, a big agency, a lot of agents in that regard. Brown is the co-head there, but also a player agent himself. And so this is somebody who you'd really be taking a swing here at, somebody different than a lot of other candidates, right? But again, is that not kind of what the Sixers need, is to take a different route and not do the same old, same old? Now, Brown was actually a candidate for the Bulls GM job this year, ended up pulling out of the running. Does, interestingly enough, represent both Kelly Oubre and Quentin Grimes, who, of course, are both free agents for Philadelphia this offseason. So maybe that gets a little weird with him coming in, but also being their agent. I imagine he wouldn't be able to do that anymore, obviously, if he is running things for Philadelphia, but has been offered multiple front office roles in recent years, hasn't obviously taken those roles, but would he be interested in maybe a full GM job here for Philadelphia? We'd have to see. But again, kind of be a big risk, but I don't mind it as well, taking an agent who has expressed a desire to be in the front office side of things. So there's 10 names that could replace Daryl Morey as the Sixers' next president of basketball operations. You let me know. Who's the name that you like to replace Morey? Could be one of the guys I named on the show. If there's somebody I missed that I did not name, certainly let me know. I'd love to hear some other perspectives. Sign off what you think in the comment section. Don't forget to hit that sub button. Of course, when the Sixers make a move and eventually hire a new president of basketball operations, we'll have you covered right here on the show.